We know that the Underground Railroad had many different routes. There were some on the eastern seaboard, of course, that was taking people from places like Maryland or from Virginia, which weren't that far to be able to go to a place like Pennsylvania or over to Ohio, and then eventually up to Michigan and hopefully to Canada. But others, as I said earlier, were in Mississippi or Alabama, or maybe even Florida. In Florida, of course, people had the benefit of not trying to go north. They would go into the swamps in the south, in Florida, and into the Everglades, and they would set up camps there. And large groups of enslaved people would actually make a life in those places. Others decided that they were going to go west, and they would go into places like New Orleans or even farther west into Texas. In Texas, you had the opportunity, because the Mexican government was still a little upset with the United States, they're gathering land. And so they welcomed people. They said, if you cross the border, we're going to allow you, like Canada, to stay here. And there were slave catchers who would actually go into Texas and cause a ruckus. But those people actually did manage to keep themselves free. Others decided to keep going west, and they would go out to the territories, out to Missouri and Kansas, and some all the way to the West Coast. Now, for those who went up the eastern seaboard, they might eventually reach Maine or New Hampshire. And all of those places have been tracked and have been identified. Well, not all of them have been identified, but certainly the network of race. And I saw that there's such a marvelous online resource here in Michigan for all of the places that were part of the Underground Railroad. There's a really marvelous statue, of course, in Battle Creek, Michigan, which was a very active community, and out to Grand Rapids. People went wherever they could, but in the going, they often would start new communities and then have to move because they would be found out. That was the case everywhere, even in New York State, where I'm from. People would come and settle in the middle of the state, or even go up into the Adirondacks, and slave catchers would follow them there. And there are some amazing stories of people and their extraordinary journeys to freedom. There's no history of any of my relatives escaping on the Underground Railroad, but certainly thousands of others. It's believed that somewhere between 150,000 and 200,000 people made their escape, using that network of people, courageous people, who put their lives on the line. Another lesson for us all, as we look back in history, to see that at a time in our nation's history when Americans couldn't agree on something as basic as whether or not owning a human being was not only legal but ethical, that there were those who stepped up. There were those of different political and religious, racial, gender, and age who said, no, we are going to commit ourselves to freedom and justice. And that is exactly what they did. And so it was that the Underground Railroad remains one of the great stories in American history. And as we end today, I would just like to say that it is a time-honored story that gives us hope as we move through another period of time in our history that is difficult, but that hope always remains.
Amen.
And if we step up and we shine our light, then perhaps that light will spread just as their light did.